Thanks for that. Okay, so today's topic, we're going to cover off the unified admin experience. Basically, it's the big shift when it comes to the application lifecycle management for finance and operations. So basically shifting the management of environments from, I'll just see if I can do laser pointer. Yep. So basically shifting the environments from the finance and operation environments from LCS, Lifecycle Services, for management to Power Platforms for management. So behind the scenes, the containers for FinOps is still quite similar to what it was previously, and you have the associated Dataverse or Power Platform environment that's associated with it. But it just, as we will continue into it, it will help centralize the administration. So next, so yeah, as we move from LCS to Power Platforms, Microsoft has introduced a range of improvements that change how we manage and deploy finance and operation environments. Basically, the key points are that it will centralize the administration for all the Dynamics 365 products and have it in one key central platform for managing the environments. And hopefully that will streamline it rather than having to do stuff in both, LCS and then having to do it also in Power Platform. And hopefully, reduce some of the errors that may occur and just increase the efficiency around the process. So yeah, coming into point 2, with streamlined and consistent operations, basically with everything shifting into Power Platforms, basically all your backing up and your restoring operations will become consistent across your different Dynamics 365 applications. And it will make it a bit easier to manage. One key important thing to note as well is with this shift to Power Platforms, there's a shift to as well with basically a capacity-based model. So now rather than, one of the benefits is rather than having, if you're wanting additional sandbox environments, rather than having to buy additional slots like what you would have to do in LCS, and also, or if you're spinning up cloud hosted environments as well for development and build type of testing purposes. If you have capacity available with your licensing, you can just spin up a new sandbox environment on demand through Power Platform and manage it within that just within the Power Platform admin center. And also just from a techie perspective, especially from a software development lifecycle and pushing through changes into production. Previously, you couldn't do continuous deployment. You could do continuous delivery and push through to a sandbox environment and have the asset there, or basically to an acceptance or a staging environment within via LCS using the APIs there and the Azure DevOps pipelines, but you still had to start the last step. You had to go in and mark that a package was a release candidate and then basically deploy the changes through LCS manually by scheduling it. When moving forward, basically with the Power Platform tools that are available, we'll be able to do continuous deployment right through into production. So we'll streamline and keep the approach consistent. When it, so the main things here is that just everything's getting centralized and hopefully it'll make things a bit more efficient and then also providing that ability to scale your environments as long as you've got the capacity there available to be able to scale the environments quite quickly on demand. Just some other, from a security perspective, some other benefits to be aware of. With the shift to the Power Platform Admin Center and centralizing from the environment management is basically with the regional data residency for compliance purposes. Basically, LCS in the only had a region for US. It didn't have one specifically for Australia. So for this particular scenario, we're shifting over to Power Platforms that has an Australian region. So it now that everything is residing within Australia when it comes to administering the environment, rather than having some stuff in the US and then having your environment located here in Australia or in your local region. So from a compliance perspective, it makes it a bit easier from and if you have any regional data protection regulations. Then also, or for a specific industry as well, you might have some industry-based regulations. One thing to note is with the backups are now truly cloud managed. So there's no option to export out to where at the moment you in LCS, you have the ability to be able to export out to LCS. Moving forward with Power Platforms, you can only perform backups, but it's held within the Power Platform admin center, and you can't within your environment within Power Platforms, but you can't export out of Power Platforms. So it's just one thing to be aware of. So from a security perspective, it's a bit better because it means that someone couldn't, if they get for some reason some type of environment access, they couldn't export out the complete database. One thing from a DevOps perspective with the pipeline, with the service connections, now there's the option for basically workload identity federation. So from that side of things, you don't have to worry about managing secrets moving forward. You can enable the federated credential on your app registration, and that way, with that service principle, you can set up your service connection so it uses that rather than having to use a secret that would have to be renewed whenever it expires. So it should simplify a little bit of that management of the connections from Azure DevOps. Next, I'll just go quickly through some terminology changes. So basically, from LCS, deployments will be basically from Power Platform as provision. Database refreshes shifts to environment copies. One thing to note is that both code and database is moved as part of the copy now, where in LCS it was only data. With a database export, you have there's no option for actually exporting the database, but you have the option to do a manual backup if you want to take like a backup at a particular point in time. There's a point in time restore, and you have the restore options available in Power Platform. There's no reset option available currently for FinOps, but the button is still there, but it won't do anything. The convert to production will become available later in December. So for converting the environment to production. From delete and allocate environments, there's the option to delete, but one thing to be aware of, you can't restore a deleted environment when it's a FinOps environment from Power Platform. But one thing to know is when it does expire, you can recreate the environment after it expires from the history. Just one thing, there was one scenario that we had for one customer where the deleted environment was for FinOps was orphaned. So just be aware of that scenario. It shouldn't really happen, but just in case, double check by just logging into your FinOps environment and making sure it actually has been removed. Otherwise, it could still be sitting there behind the scenes, even though Power Platforms doesn't show it. But it's just one thing to be aware of. You can just raise a request with Microsoft, and they'll deal with it. When it comes to reviewing capacity and seeing whether or not you can provision more environments, and just one thing to be really mindful of moving forward, because you will get notifications that you're exceeding your capacity if you are currently exceeding it. But through the Power Platform environment, you just can click on the capacity tab, and you can view per environment. You can see your database and file usage. From that side of things, you can easily click on an individual environment, and you can click on the size for your database, for a FinOps database, but then it will show you also the list of tables by the size. So you can decide whether or not you need to clear some clean up some logging tables and things like that to bring down your capacity, so you can see what where your major consumption is. From reviewing, also you have the option to review licensing from Power Platform. So you can click on the licenses and you can view by environment, but you can just see the overall status of the how many licenses you have and if they've been assigned to users, and you'll get some notification, some utilization statuses as well. That will give you some other insights. One of the changes for FinOps is basically previously in LCS with the management mode, it's shifted in Power Platform. So you have to go into the environment details, click the edit button, and there's now it's an administration mode, and you can enable that and save it, and that will allow you to go into basically what would be the equivalent of management mode in the past. And then you have to do the same process to disable it. When it comes to applying service updates, it's a little bit hidden, like you still have the automatic updates, but just in the way of if you're wanting to apply a specific service update to an environment, you have to go into the D365 applications, you have to go then to the provisioning app, and then click on the options button, go to manage, and then you'll see the particular service update that you want to apply, and click the agreement, click save, and the install button, and it will trigger off. But it's just, in LCS, it was quite easy to identify when you wanted to apply an update. You could just go to maintain, apply update, and then you could do it from there. In Power Platform, it's a little bit hidden, but it's still available. One thing when it comes to the federated credentials, I'm just going to show just a quick little tip to do is that basically when you're in the app registration, you can set up your federated credential, and also in Azure DevOps with your service connection, you can tick that you want to use a federated credential. But when you're setting up the federated credential, you have to specify an issuer, which is your Azure DevOps organization, but don't get it mixed up with your Entra ID, tenant ID. It's not that. It's actually your Azure DevOps organization. So your organization that's created within your Azure DevOps, you have to get the specific ID for that. So from that side of things, the easiest way I found to do it, apart from you can go and use the the client utility, like the client tools, like the command line tools, I should say, to find out the information. But the easiest way I've found to do it is just basically go into your organization for DevOps, go to the extensions, go browse marketplace, and then up in the query string, it's a little bit hidden, but in the query string, you can find the organization ID. You just copy and paste that, and you can put that in the issuer. And then when it comes to the subject identifier, it's basically your organization, your project, and then your service connection name. And that's pretty much it when it comes to setting it up. And once, I figured out, clarified what that organization ID was, then things worked pretty simple from there on. Some other considerations is that, it's a shift to a unified development approach. So when you do provision a development environment within Power Platform, developers can now develop locally in the Visual Studio installed on their local local desktop, but then have the Power Platform tools installed in Visual Studio and connect to a shared environment. So it's moving back to with prior versions of AX and prior versions of Dynamics. Basically, they were more based on a shared development environment, and developers would have to learn how to work in those type of scenarios. In some ways, it's moved, and then it moved away from that, and would have to have a developer per environment with the cloud host environments. So it's moved back to like you can still have an environment per developer if you wanted to, but developers can share an environment now. So in smaller projects where it doesn't make sense to have multiple development environments, you can share, as long as you're segregating those concerns where when it comes to trying to do extensions in the same areas, is trying to make sure that you segregate the work out, so there's you're not competing for particular types of objects that you're working on. When you're doing an environment copy, just be aware you can't go from LCS back to Power Platform. You can't go from Power Platforms and copy to LCS. You can only copy from LCS to Power Platforms. when it comes to the data refresh. So it's just one constraint. And when it comes to naming your environments, for instance, if you did it just through the UI and specified a name and you created the environment, if the name has already been taken, then it will add on like a unique identifier to your subdomain. But if you want to be explicit that, no, I want a particular subdomain, there is an option within the client command line utilities for Power Apps, where you can specify that you want a specific subdomain name. And when you do that, and if it's not available, you get an error. So it won't provision. So if you want to use a specific domain name. So yeah, just to recap, it's just basically centralizing everything into Power Platforms. It should hopefully make things a little bit more efficient and a bit more easier when it comes to, because in that way you'll have mixed solutions in the sense of some extensions done in FinOps and some done in Power Platforms as part of Power Apps, Power Automate, even other type of solutions that you might make within the Power Platform applications. But it should align with make it a bit easier when it comes to doing deployments from that side of things. Cool.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. It gives a good perspective of what the current state of technology is. You and I are talking about the same thing about giving you access to a box, and we are sharing the box now for your development. So, but
yes,
all of this is very good to know. And LCS remains, right? LCS is not forgotten. It has to have LCS to save the asset and then deploy it from there. Is that correct, or is
for existing environments? Eventually, the production environments will be migrated across from an administration perspective. So everything will shift to Power Platforms. It will be rolled out in future. But eventually, right. Eventually the production environments will be the management of those production environments will shift over to Power Platforms.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and one thing I just wanted to quickly highlight is just one of the benefits with having the development environments, the unified development environments within Power Platforms, is you can reduce your storage costs when it comes to the cloud-hosted environments. Because rather than having a bunch of cloud-hosted environments, if you've got capacity to use the unified development environments, it can save money from that side of things. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Use your existing licensing. Yeah.